The purpose of this presentation is to talk a little bit about how to teach those irregular words, the words that are spelled irregularly, the words that we call tricky words. Okay, so before we begin, the website here and the three texts shown on this slide are some good resources for you to consider after you watch the presentation. And I don't have all three of them here with me, but I do have two of them. Okay, so after you watch this presentation, if you'd like to get a copy of these, I highly encourage it. They might be helpful if you want to learn more about the aspects of phonemes and phonics that usually take years for teachers to accumulate. The text, Multisensory Teaching of Basic Language Skills, this one, the text itself isn't cheap, but it's come down a little bit in price, and by working through it and this accompanying workbook pages, just a few minutes a day, you might be light years ahead of some of the most seasoned teachers who never had the benefit of being exposed to this stuff in college or during teaching. They're pretty good. And also remember that your speech and language pathologist in your district is really an invaluable source for setting up your room or strategies suggested in this presentation. They're very helpful. So also speech to print. Okay, there they are. Okay, let's get going. So what are irregular words? They have many names. Exception words, tricky words, heart words, rule breakers, memory words, anything. Maybe you have a term different that you use. Irregular words are words that have a letter or some letters that don't make their typical sounds. So if we were to read the word using typical sounds, or if we would read the word was, typically it would come out was. Now, if you've watched the presentation in the series about orthographic mapping and sight words, because sight words in this series are words that a reader can read automatically, accurately, instantaneously without any cognitive effort, many people, myself included, don't like to refer to irregular words as sight words because it implies that irregular words just have to be memorized because they can't be sounded out. That they have to be learned by sight and never decoded or analyzed. And that premise right there is the approach that this presentation is trying to dispel, because the most common ways of instructing students in reading irregular words, that they have to be learned and memorized as chunks, is not supported by any evidence. It's just not the best way. All right. So here's a screenshot I took from a Google image search for teaching tricky words. Thousands of results come up telling us that this is something that educators and parents really spend a lot of time on. A glance at almost every activity or game here suggested online tells us that the aim is to get students to repeat the words, to write them over and over again, to see them over and over again. Yeah, this will work, absolutely. But why have kids confusing what, want, went, when for 2 years instead of just learning them accurately, just like they would learn the words shop or stop? As we move forward in this presentation, take note of something. Almost all irregular words only have one letter sound correspondence that's irregular. And often the part that seems irregular happens with regularity in lots of words. So where we're going here is that it makes sense to actually draw attention to the letters in these words, just like we would any other words, and to note the part of the word that's irregular. Talk about how that letter makes such a sound in many other words by giving examples of it. Let's see this. Okay. All right. Instruction in school focuses on rote memorization and repetition of irregular words because so many of them occur with high frequency in the books that children read. Depending on the source, I've seen estimates for the percentages of words in children's books that are high frequency range from 45 to 90%. It depends on the book, of course, but no matter what the percentage, no matter what the number is, it's a lot. This popular book here, 10 Apples on Top, is comprised almost entirely of words that occur frequently. The Dr. Seuss books and others like that were created for the express purpose of having kids see them over and over and over again until they were memorized. High-frequency words are particularly important for the earliest new readers, but eventually the most popular high-frequency words are all learned. And then a reader still is faced with hundreds or thousands of words with irregular spellings. Remember, for this presentation, we're going to focus on irregularly spelled words, and some high-frequency words are irregular and some are not. Let's look at this. Okay, one thing to be aware of as educators is that just because a word happens a lot in print, that it happens frequently, it doesn't mean it's tricky or irregular. Here's a list of Fry words. Edward Fry made this list of 1,000 words many years ago, and these are the most common words in English ranked in frequency. This picture shows the first 100 words. You might have also heard of Dolch words. This is a smaller list of 220 words compiled by Edward Dolch in the 30s, based on words that occurred most frequently in books read by children at that time. It was believed then, and it's still now unfortunately, that instruction of reading should happen by having children memorize words as whole units. You got to go back and see the presentation in the series on that. Look at the third word on this list, the word and. If the child knows the sounds a, and d, all regular conventional sounds made by those letters, he or she can read it. So the knowledge of the learner is something to consider as well. Look at word 73, the word right. The letters follow the typical pronunciations. WR represents as in wrath or wrangle or wrestle. The I and E make conventional long I sound, and the T says T. It's not an irregular word, but if a child hasn't learned the WR yet or the silent E pattern, it's going to have to be learned by memorization at first. And we should also still point out some of those features when we're teaching. So this is why some programs are now teaching high-frequency words in such a way that they introduce those that can be decoded based on the letters and sounds that the kids have already learned. Takeaways here are that educators need to be mindful of words and their learners. Are the letters in this word representing conventionally used sounds? Does the student know the patterns or the sounds yet? So to get the most out of this presentation, let's focus on some strategies for teaching the words that are perceived by many to have irregular sounds. Strategy 1 is that we should highlight the part of the word that is irregular. Some programs underline the so-called tricky part to alert the student that this part of the word is breaking a rule. So look at the word they. Most people, teachers and students alike, associate E and Y with the E sound as in key, money, and so on. So if E is the sound that students know for EY, it would make sense to underline the EY and tell them that these letters are underlined because they don't sound like E that you know. Instead, it makes the sound A in this word. The underlining will alert them not to try to use the sounds they would expect when reading that word. Similarly, the O in from makes the ah sound, so they shouldn't try to make it say ah if that's the only sound they know for O at that particular time. Worth repeating here is that the majority of irregular words typically only have one irregular sound. If programs and educators highlight the one irregular piece in the word, telling students the sound it actually does make, and encourage them to now sound it out, the child has read the word and will be able to do so again independently. This is much, much more effective than memorization over and over and over. That's cumbersome, it's time consuming, and it's going to be riddled with error. All right, one program that highlights the irregular sound in a word is Core Knowledge Language Arts, published by the Core Knowledge Foundation. This particular text I have here is reinforcing newly taught vowel sounds such as O, 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 U, which are in bold font to draw attention to them. The irregularly spelled sounds in would, could, and have are printed so that the not yet learned exception sounds for these highlighted parts are not attempted in the wrong way. They also highlight sounds that are not yet known, such as the ow and down. The sound for that spelling is regular, but not yet taught in the lessons. The kids haven't learned it yet. By the way, the core knowledge texts are available for free if you go to the website I have here, coreknowledge.org, and they can be printed or downloaded PDFs for use on tablets and computers, and they're available right now for grades K through 5. Other programs, such as EBLI, EBLI, teach that there are no irregular words. The thinking there is that since we have consistencies in the way our letters spell our sounds, they should be noticed and practiced. Students' attention is drawn to all the sounds in a word. The patterns that seem irregular are pointed out and shown that they occur in other words. The students recognize the alternate spellings for those sounds, and ultimately the words don't seem irregular at all. As you can see, instead of telling the students, oh yeah, the word they is irregular because E and Y don't say E, students are told A makes the A sound, like in gray, hay, and obey. And if a child's brain can look at EY and attach E to it, it can also look at EY and attach A to it. That makes the words that have that spelling automatic for those words. They're going to be sight words more quickly and more efficiently. I'll let you read this and let it sink in for a moment before we move on. It's a perfect point to be made. So what this is saying, that our all too common practice in education of having kids just memorize tricky words, is the opposite of what we should do. The evidence in the research is that if we draw attention to the so-called irregular part and tell them the sound it does make, and then have them sound it out with that sound, the mystery of the word is gone. It's just a word they can read now. No need to have a pile of words to memorize. It's too time consuming, it's inefficient, it's stressful. The second strategy in this presentation takes into consideration what was on the last two slides. Our goal is to help students master the most common words. You can see the presentation on sight words. After all, isn't that the point by drawing their attention to the sounds, not memorizing, which is most commonly done and commonly not effective? So organizing a display on a wall so that students attend to sounds and are drawn to notice those patterns within words will go a lot farther than a typical word wall will to make these words stick. Again, research evidence shows that irregular words require more analysis of sounds, not less. If just one spelling in an irregular word has to be paid attention to, the practice of having them memorize the whole word as a chunk results in this needlessly drawn out thing. We need to draw the students' attention to the sound structure. By noticing and paying attention to the spellings and matching them up with the pronunciations already in our brains, the brain activates connections and puts these words into long-term memory. Typical word walls, organized A to Z, often end up featuring lots of words that don't really belong. And they often are missing some phonemes like sh or ng, like in sing, long, and so forth. All right. Examine this soundboard. We can see a few problems. First, the A features an apple, which is going to cue some children that A says ah. Yet some of the words below say ah, like an R and Annie. And then the C says k, as in clown, yet underneath that there are some words with a CH digraph, ch. So we can see that with this simple word wall example that word walls organized like phone books, just in alphabetical order for students to reference when they're spelling and look up, don't really serve the important purpose, which is to help children remember them. And actually, as a few colleagues reviewed this presentation for me and pointed out, the problem with word walls as they are typically used in that alphabetical order, it really needs to be made explicit. The problem is that the alphabetical approach makes learning these words a visual approach, because students are only looking for the beginning sounds letter and then, copying down the rest. They're not using what they hear in the word. Imagine a child sitting at their desk doing some independent work and she wants to spell the word about. There's every possibility that she could look under the U because she hears it start with a. We've all seen children do this. She hears represents to spell the word city, she might look under the letter S. So I encourage you to re-examine how word walls are going forward. And in the next slide, I have some examples of sound walls. So the long-honored tradition of alphabetizing word walls has its issues. This style of organization is in line with a belief that words should be memorized as whole units, and that irregular words are just so bizarre that they can't be sounded out. Here we see a teacher who organizes highly frequent words by ways to spell a sound. These pictures show two vowel sounds, a and ow. The children are approaching words for what they are here, representations of the sounds in our spoken words. And then we have some sound wall examples. This teacher made a sheet with her students of the spellings for the sound A, all the different ways to spell A. And on the next slide, here's an amazing wall with the spellings for sounds, and it illustrates how the same spelling can make different sounds. So the students in this class come to understand that the spellings just of the letter A can represent the sounds a, and so forth. Here there's many sheets to show the spellings representing the sounds w and k and so forth. You can pause and take a good look at that. I encourage you to stop it here. And here's an example that could be put on chart paper the way the consonant J is, or J, excuse me, the sound J is spelled in English. Here I put the words from the high frequency list earlier on here, and this would be a fantastic group class activity. A teacher could hold up a word like page and ask the students which spelling of J it should go under. Some might just say G, others might say GE, and then they would have to tell you how many sounds in page, page. So the GE at the end of page is what's really making this J sound. And the E is silent, and so on. So you really are getting children to understand why a word is making the sounds that it is. So in the word general, only the G is making the J sound. The E is making E. It's not silent. And the middle two columns give you a chance to tell students that when G is followed by an E, an I, or a Y, it says the J sound. And some of these words might belong on other sound walls that you make. So we can look at how that's the case. The next slide here would be a way to sort words for some of the ways to spell I in English. And again, here are some of the words that were on the Fry list, and another example of just choosing one of these words and asking the children, like the word busy under the U, what part of this word makes the I sound and where should we put it? So, or for example, in the word village, there's the I is making the I, and so is the A making the I. And why? What can we discover about that? So it's a nice way for children to learn and notice, and really when they are looking at a word wall or a sound wall like this, they'll say, oh, that's why, and that's why, and they'll get into the internal structure of the word and remember it a lot more, and then generalize to new words. Okay. These kids are going to be able to have some really cool aha self-teaching moments when they examine the words. Their brains, I just want to say some more, they're going to understand and recognize the various spellings for our English words. Brains love patterns, and if we're comfortable with expecting students to memorize hundreds and hundreds of words, we should not then be uncomfortable to expect that they can memorize a few alternative ways that sounds are spelled. Thousands of words or just a few alternative ways. So memorizing a word as a whole unit doesn't do anything to help me learn a different word. Knowing how spellings in my language make various sounds helps me to learn all words. Alrighty. Yes, another strategy that many educators and programs find really helpful is teaching, of course, similarly patterned words in groups. So this again draws attention to the sound that's being made to the spellings, by the spellings, excuse me. Letter sounds and phonemes are being paid attention to beautifully here. Our alphabetic code is 26 letters in English. Alone, combined with other letters, they make about 44 sounds. There are dozens and dozens of ways to spell those sounds in our language, though. Another strategy is sound boxes, where the student has to map the spellings to the sounds in the word to its phonemes. Talk about paying attention to the sound structure of a word. Here I've used a chart similar to one used by EBLI. See the reference list at the end here. But there's also similar charts in programs like Letters, LETRS, also referenced here. I've used one that's more complex to make it more challenging to you as an adult. I've done the first word for you, precious. First we count how many sounds are in the word. Students are going to need phoneme awareness, right? But sh, s, 6 sounds. I know I have to fill in 6 boxes with the spellings that make those 6 sounds. I'll pause here for a bit while you do a few on your own, starting with chagrin, sh, g, n. Fill in the boxes with the 6 spellings that make chagrin. Okay, so I bet it was a challenge for you at first, right? For example, the sh in chagrin, it does say a ch says it a lot. Michelle and parachute, a French origin. Initial, I'll pause here and let you count the phonemes yourself. Initial, I, n, I, sh, o. Was it tricky for you? All right. So I'll pause here a bit while you do some of these. It might be fun for you to stop this and give it a try. All right. So here are the answers on the next slide. If some of these are new concepts for you, remember some of these books can help you, or just practicing this. And finally, on the next slide, we have an example that you could use with young children who need to practice irregular words. So I like the illustration here, including words like you and for and words and more, because they have that spelling of the sound or, all of them. But sometimes, I'm looking at mine here and you can follow along on yours. Sometimes or is one sound, and sometimes it's 2 sounds. So sometimes we can pretend we're calling it, like calling the sound or home for dinner. Or 2 sounds. But in the third word, which happens to be words, or is just making 1 sound, So this is a handy slide to look at too, because your and for, the first 2 words here, rhyme, but the sounds of or are spelled differently. I hope you can see the instructional power in this, because as a student writes the sounds in the boxes, they are saying them out loud at the same time. They're writing, they're saying, they're noticing, and they see the word what. They have to segment it and write it in the box. Now they will not only fill in 3 boxes, what, t, and their brains are noticing and reinforcing the spelling. They're spelling the w with a WH, and they're noticing the phoneme and the letters, and they're hearing the and saying, wow, is being spelled with an A, wow. And how nice that their brains are now accepting that the sound is spelled with an A. It's not an exception for them anymore. So they're actually mapping the phoneme in their brain to the letter that it's spelled with, and there's an anchoring. It's very, very powerful stuff for future reading of other words. All right, so now that we understand a couple things, we can see what could be wrong with sending home a note like this. We should use the term irregular words, because the term sight word are words that you can just read by sight. And the words I can read by sight are different than the words a first grader can read by sight. My sight words are not sight words for a first grader. And more importantly, the sentence, they must be memorized, is not based on the evidence. Yes, they have to be learned, as do all words, but memorizing them as whole units like pictures is going to lead to guessing and a long, long learning process with a lot of mistakes. So let's zero in on those sounds that are in the words. Let's have kids break them apart, say the sounds, map the sounds that they're saying to the spellings they're seeing. And the only exception to this would be for students who haven't learned letter sounds yet. If it's kindergarten and they only know a few sounds and they're trying to read a little simple book like Matt sat on the cat, of course it's going to be fine to tell them that the word the is the, and they can't sound it out yet. Use your judgment, especially if you're a kindergarten teacher, to have a child temporarily memorize a few of these words so they can get through a text successfully. Once they know their letter sounds, though, it's time to pay attention to them. Otherwise, instead of a note like this, let's send home some of those sound boxes like we saw in the last few slides, and encourage parents to notice the sounds along with their children for homework instead. All right, I would love to give a very, very special thank you to Nora Shabazi, passionate reading expert and founder of EBLI, Evidence-Based Literacy Instruction. I referred to this a couple times in this presentation. Her feedback that she gave on this one was fantastic. On the next slide, you'll see a link to her program's website and also to an irregular sight words app where all words are taught by sound, and you might be interested in that. Well, actually, it was on that slide. And last, I want to thank you for participating in this knowledge series. I hope you really continue to invest in your knowledge. As an educator, I've been doing this 20 years and I'm still learning. I can still help my students as I learn more. My contact information is here. Send me questions and definitely watch some more of these presentations. Thanks.